What is up? This is going to be the first of many videos. So for this first one, I thought it would be awesome if we could start with something that's very basic, very fundamental, which is grayscales. Now, people usually find these terribly boring and they think that they're very basic. And the truth is, like most of the more impressive paintings that have been done in history of painting actually use value as a very, very important tool in the sense that value not only helps depict form, it helps represent nature faithfully, but it also becomes an aid in terms of composition. So I want everyone to think that this is not only important to represent. This is not only important to view nature and to try to depict it faithfully. So we can attest to the fact that this is really, really important for us painters that are attracted to naturalism. But, and this is the thing that we seldom remember, value can also be used as a compositional tool. It can also be used to create hierarchy. So yes, it speaks about light, and that's what we usually associate value with. But I'm hoping that with these very simple exercises that we do, we can start understanding value also as a just really, really important tool to communicate visually. So what I usually do, and this is what I'm going to do not only in this video, but in all the videos to come, is that I'm going to do a set of exercises that I usually do in my painting classes that I usually have my students work on. So for this first one, I asked them to do a grayscale. Now, grayscales are usually a little tricky. I always tell people, always make them in a surface that has a value to it. So in this one, I just picked some plywood, and I don't have to put like an imprimatura under it or like a tone under it so that it can differentiate from the color we're going to put on top. So what I did was I sanded it down and I put some acrylic binding medium on top. You could do that. You could use if you don't have anything available to you, you could even use like PVA. You just have to seal the wood just so the values can be gauged properly. So the wood doesn't absorb all the oil. So you can so it kind of maintains on the surface, and you can actually differentiate all those values properly. So I sanded the wood down. I put a coat of this. So I seal it. It acts like a primer. I seal my wood, and then I just used tape. I divided it into like squares. I like to do like from 0 to 10. So it's actually like 11 steps, 0 being your darkest dark, which for today we're going to use ivory black, and 10 being your lightest light, which I'm using titanium white, which is a very opaque white, which is really, really good to for making like grayscales, because it's the most covering and opaque white that you can get. So I would recommend doing it with titanium. But if you want to be very detailed with your work and very comprehensive, you could use it. You could use a flake white if you're using any sort of lead white, or you could use a titanium zinc mix if that's what you also use in your palette, just so you know how those whites actually behave while you're mixing. So what makes different the exercises that I do from the ones you usually see when people are learning from a grayscale is that I'm not only going to use it trying to depict an image faithfully, but I'm also going to understand that I can also use value, that I can also then interpret value. So yes, we start by acknowledging that there are things that are lighter than or darker than, but we don't stop there. Though that exercise is actually going to come later, where we just try to represent faithfully what we're looking at. Today, we're going to accept that one of our responsibilities is actually to interpret. And what I mean by interpreting is that we can actually alter things, the things we perceive in nature, onto our painting and translate them onto our painting in order to say more emphatically what we want to say. So I have an image that I'm already going to work from, and it's basically my daughter with like a big shirt with one of my white shirts. So I already picked like a certain light in certain objects that are going to be, I guess, more coherent with the exercise that I'm going to do. And I'm saying more coherent because all of this is going to be like a mid-tone light painting. And we're actually going to subject ourselves to be in an area of the palette, in a very specific area of the palette. So we're actually going to paint these three paintings, which are going to be three versions of the painting. We're only going to use values 7 through 10. So we're going to use 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, we could pre-mix those values, and if you feel more comfortable just having them pre-mixed in your palette, that's totally fine. I usually work with an open palette, so I'm only going to use this area of the palette for this exercise. But what I did was I pre-mixed my value 7, and I put it here, so that I know that that's going to be my darkest dark. If I need to mix more, I'll mix it, right now. Just so I have like a big enough pile that I don't have to start to like adding black to it, and then I just kind of eyeball it, and then maybe I start to go off the restraint I put myself within my grayscale. So in order to not do that, to not run the risk of just going to these values, at least premix your parameter, and you're going to be fine with that. So we're actually going to work within these. So these are very strange exercises because obviously what becomes very apparent is that we're not going to contrast our image. We're not going to have contrast available in our image. Our highest contrast is going to come from having value 10 right next to value 7. But we are going to hopefully understand that even within these very limited set of values, we can actually make a picture. And so much so that we can actually make 3 different images. So what I'm going to do in my sketchbook is actually just paint these very, very loosely, because these are going to be just color studies in a way, to see which version do I want to develop further. So I'll do this in one page, and in the next page I'm going to develop one of these paintings further. And I'm leaning towards my shirt being the lightest light. So that's the first option I have, is the shirt being the lightest light. The second one I have is the face being the lightest light. And the third one I have is the light tone being dominant throughout the painting. So there's not going to be the light mid-tone being dominant throughout the painting. So there's not going to be contrast. It's all going to be very, very similar. Like values are going to be very, very close to each other. So the painting is actually going to feel almost like there's a veil on top of it, and it's going to be really hard to read. But I feel that those are 3 very good options that we can actually give hierarchy to the shirt, which is a big mass, so it's going to be bottom heavy, so that we can give hierarchy to the portrait, so that it's going to feel like a spotlight almost on the painting, or that we can understand it as a heavily atmospheric image where there's the mood of it overpowers the specific information that's inside that atmosphere. So next step, so now that I've done like my 3 little sketches here, what I have to do is actually seal my paper. I'm not going to work on a raw piece of paper. And what's cool about this is that, you know, I can use it to seal everything. It's this transparent acrylic binder actually helps seal the surface, and since it's transparent, I can actually see my drawing. So I'm going to cut now. I'm going to seal my paper, just maybe put 1 or 2 coats of this, and then we'll come back. We have to wait till it dries, so it's probably like, it dries in probably like half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. So when we come back, this is going to be sealed, and it's going to be ready to be painted. And we'll start there. So I'm back. The paper had dried. The acrylic binder had dried. So I went ahead and I used my very, very limited palette. Remember, it's a very small palette in terms of its value range. There's a real conscious constraint here. So that was my darkest dark. That's a very, very light color. And I worked all these 3 versions of the same image to kind of show you that regardless of the variables that are available to us, in this case, very, very small set of variables, because we're only using 2 colors, black and white, titanium white and ivory black. And even within those, even within that hue range, because they are 2 colors, I know that many times we think of black and white as void of color, but no, we're going to start treating black and white as color. You can actually tell that it has a very recognizable temperature as soon as you put it against the color of the wood. So even though we're doing a grisaille, we have to start to become conscious that these, you know, are colors that have temperature, that have hue. So in this case, both of those colors, both the ivory black and the titanium white, are very, very cool colors. You know, they have cool temperature. And in the case of ivory black, it's actually a black blue. So you can actually tell that it has that bluish hue when you compare it to, you know, other colors. And in this case, our surface, the sort of native color of our surface, is going to help us identify that that hue when we compare it to the color. So again, to summarize, we did this painting, or these 3 versions of this one image in a very small space in terms of value range. We just worked from value 7 through 10. So that was our darkest dark, and that was our lightest light. So I thought that, you know, we would have 3 kind of possibilities available to us, 3 very obvious possibilities, I guess. So in this first one, I concentrated on on her shirt as being the focal point, and value is going to help us to, you know, pinpoint the objects or the moments within our painting that we want to feel hierarchical. So in this case, you know, I made the painting about her shirt, while on this one, everything kind of like the darkest darks are framing the upper part of the painting, and they frame her portrait. So her face was going to be the lightest light, and it actually has the highest amount of contrast because it's against our darkest dark, even if our darkest dark is value 7. And in the third one, I wanted to have that light mid-tone be dominant throughout the painting. It's almost like you have a very kind of thick atmosphere, like soupy atmosphere in that painting. So it's very hard to read, but it's actually really, really a really sensitive way to portray an image. You're asking a lot of your viewer to kind of adjust the way they usually look at things, so that they can actually sort of navigate this image. So these first two are very evident in terms of of how you're using value as an arrow to your intent, almost like as something that's pointing to your intent. With this one, it's more about the wholeness of the image and the atmosphere that envelops the figure in this case. So I thought it was really cool to sort of realize that even if our possibilities are very, very small, we can actually embrace those restrictions and work within those possibilities and actually make a very strong painting if we wish to work within those constraints. So never find sort of the lack of access to either saturation in color or hue differences. Never find those as limiting. I've always thought that we are the ones who are going to be limited by those things if we choose to, but they are not limiting. In and of themselves, they're not limiting. So the first thing is to accept that we have to work within that range, and then we have to say, okay, now that I'm working within this range, what can I do with this, and how can I use the tools that I have, in terms of value, to actually make a statement in my painting. So it's not just about representation. It's not just about translating one-to-one, what you're looking at and into your painting, but it's also interpreting and realizing that in the process of interpreting, you can actually turn those limitations into very, very strong tools that work for you and that actually help the viewer, or help you guide the viewer through your painting. So I'm going to pick this one, the first option, because I think it's kind of the coolest, because I really like that abstract shape of the shirt, which actually requires a lot of discipline to stay within those values. But in here, our very small palette, kind of helps us not get distracted by other values, because it's so short, it's so small, that in a more open palette where you have different hues, different temperatures, you'd be more prone to make mistakes. While here, if you just say, well, that shirt has to stay right here, you recognize the area of your palette where you're going to work very easily, super, super easily. So it's actually the exercise of controlling your palette, and hence controlling your painting, is going to be far more simpler. So this would be the first exercise I would ask of people, to just pick an image that you think would translate well within these values, this value range, and then not just see it as a singular possibility, but try to think of that image as the starting point of very, very different images, and explore them. This took nothing. This took like maybe an hour to do. So give yourself that possibility to not only establish control over your values, but also realize that you can say very different things, almost like vastly different things, within a very, very limited palette. And after you're done, look at the possibilities and say, okay, which one can work best? I personally think that they all can work, given the intent that you have when you paint. They could all be effective images, all of them. There's no reason why any one of these wouldn't work. But I'm going to concentrate on this one. So I already did did like a drawing, like a tighter drawing, that I'm going to try not to follow really that much when I paint. It's going to be this little drawing. I'm going to try not to follow it too much. I'm going to kind of paint over it quite liberally. And these are the images that I ended up doing. Let me see if we can focus that better. So, as you can tell, again, very, very short, restrained range of values, but very different possibilities. I think it helps when you understand the image as a whole and you're not thinking about detail. This is a small sketchbook, so these images are actually quite small, and it doesn't, it serves no purpose if a small image that we're going to treat as a study, we think of it as something that's going to be very, very precious. This one, I want to be a little more specific with the information, but, and I did this drawing, but now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's tons of things that I don't like, particularly in the face. So I'm going to probably paint on top of that, because the way I view drawing is just as a tool that helps me understand. But if I'm doing a painting, I want to solve through painting. I don't want my painting to be attached forcefully to the drawing that I already made. I want the drawing to instruct my painting decisions, but I don't want my drawing to actually direct all of those decisions and overpower my painting. So we're going to paint on top of this, because I really I really don't like this, but it's actually a good idea to do that with you guys, just so that you know that even though we have this information that may seem precious, in this case I don't really like it, so I don't feel it's that precious, but we never stop drawing. So this is a very sort of classical formal way of understanding drawing, because we see line work, and because it was done on a piece of paper, and because it was done with a pencil. But drawing is actually, any decision you make is a drawing decision if you think about it. So I always think that drawing speaks more abstractly about decision making and commitment than just understanding it in a very simple terms. It's just line. So we're going to paint this, and I'm going to show you a little bit of how I paint this. So I'm going to show some stages of the painting while I'm painting it. But hopefully we can maintain the really kind of nice bigness that I appreciate from this image that's very, very well controlled, while getting into more specific detail, like stuff in her, information in her portrait, for example, or folds. So we're going to see how that works. So, okay. So yeah, this looks a bit like a cooking show. A second goes by and we're all done. I promise that in future videos, and this is going to be the case, if you guys have followed my Instagram live videos, that I do most of my live paintings from scratch. So there are going to be more comprehensive step-by-step paintings in the future. But again, I do feel that these paintings, the ones that are developed in a very specific area of the grayscale, of the value scale, they're not so complicated to understand. because the variables are so limited. When you look at the painting, there's only going to be a few set of values that you can choose from. So it's not confusing. It's not undecipherable when you look at the painting. It's pretty easy to recognize where in my value scale I was getting my grays from. I was mixing my grays from. So I do feel that that's very clear with these paintings. So I wanted to jump ahead, and like I said, I wasn't happy at all with my treatment of the information in her portrait. I knew that the face was going to be of a darker value than the shirt, so I felt it was very unimportant to just be stuck on features, on the specific quality of features. So when I blocked it in, I pretty much just took my darkest dark, which is value 7, and I masked in all my darks, like eye sockets, the hair, the shadow mask. I masked all those in, and once they were all together, I took maybe a step lighter, the value that was a step lighter, and I used it to mask my lights. So it's very, very basic, and I feel much more comfortable with that understanding of form instead of understanding form through the specifics of the eye or the specifics of the nose or the particulars of the mouth. My intent in painting has always been you start from the whole, from a very concise vision of the whole, and from there you move on to details. And when you do it that way, it's very challenging, because when you start to detail your work, you have to be aware of the whole of your painting. You have to maintain the bigger relationships of a painting. So details have to be inscribed into larger laws within your painting. So I've always been attracted to that way of painting, big to small. So sometimes we get caught up in detail, and I'm not immune to that. I'll make mistakes like that. I think there's always risks to that. So the important thing is to remember that we're going to make tons of mistakes, throughout our lives while we're working. It's not a matter of not making those mistakes. It's just a matter of always being able to be conscious about them and sort of redirecting our course and acknowledging that, wow, I knew that there were risks involved in doing it this way. And even if I was really concentrated and I'm really aware that there are risks, I many times fall into those traps. So that's always going to happen. I'm not scared of that. The important thing to remember is not to panic, and to know that the best qualities come from understanding why, or at least attempting to understand why we made those mistakes and how we can kind of fix them. And maybe we have to work within our abilities, but always, if you know there's something wrong with the work you're doing, always at least attempt to, like I said, redirect, your course. Even if it means starting over, erasing everything, starting a new painting, it's always best to do that. So in my case, I just felt very frustrated with the specifics of the portrait. So I went ahead and I just blocked everything in, and I feel far more comfortable. Looking ahead, because I already know what this painting looks like, and judging my effort, my final effort, I feel that there's a quality in that little thumbnail, that little study that I did, that I couldn't really get to when I did the finished the finished painting, the finished exercise, let's call it. I mean, it's still a painting, but I always like to understand my paintings as exercises. If I view them as such, it's, at least in my mind, they seem to have like a very clear objective. And I like that. I actually really, really like that. So when I saw it in the end, and I always judge every single thing I do while I try to do it while I'm painting, but I also try to do it after I'm done with it, after I consider I'm done with it. I realized that I lost the big abstract shape of that shirt because I was a little too concerned with the folds and the tiny little shifts in value that were inside that light shape. And I should have, because my intent initially was to keep that very, very light. And I should have controlled my darks, what would be my darker values within those lights a little bit better. So I feel they're a little too heavy, a little too heavy-handed, and they break up the shape a little too much. So in retrospect, when I'm being critical about what I did, I would have sacrificed a little bit of that information in order to have like this big, really nice abstract shape that's kind of enveloping her. I think that would have been like a cooler painting. Again, I don't feel like the painting in the end looked bad. It's just that at some point, it's not about making something nice. It's not about being capable of painting something. It's about attempting to paint your intent. And that's the hardest, part. That's the hardest thing in the world, that you have something in your mind and that you can realize it while you're painting. So I'm still painting very, very carefully those little areas, and every time I'm out of frame, my hand is out of frame, is looking for a value in the palette. And hopefully what you're realizing is that I don't move my brush around like crazy. I'm trying to do very, very specific things with my brush strokes, or the areas of paint that I consider are of the same value. And as soon as I notice that I have to do something different, I'll go back to my palette and I'll try to find, another value, and I'll work on a very specific area afterwards. Even if this is really constrained. I mean, think about it. We have like 4 values to work from. So, and I already laid in my darkest darks. So it's pretty much 3 values for the rest of the painting. And if I'm working within the shirt, it's probably 2.5 steps. So I feel the direction I wanted to give this small exercise is communicated, but I think it could have been communicated a little more solidly. So here I'm gonna begin to work on just very, very little bits of information inside that face, inside that head. I was hesitant to do these little lights in the face. I mean, they would eventually model the head a little bit more. They would give it more three-dimensionality, but they also, making those lights or differentiating those midtones, those light midtones from darker midtones. If I went too far with that, those lights would start competing with the lights on my shirt. So your eye would start kind of bouncing around the image, and I really didn't want that. So I had to be very, very careful to when deciding how much I wanted to develop that head. And again, perhaps developing is not the right term, because you can develop all your detail and work within those boundaries. But I guess what I'm referring to is expanding the value range that I could work, in,
when trying to model the specific qualities of that head. So I wanted to see how far I could take it without really competing with that shirt. So I think I controlled that a little bit better. You know, and again, in retrospect, I feel it's kind of cool that I didn't let myself do like tiny little details in the face, which I think would be totally unnecessary, and really unnecessary for a painting of not of this size, but you know, a painting done maybe in an hour or a little bit less. That was, you know, the intent of the painting was not really just seeking this, you know, this expression that could be transmitted through the specific qualities of the eyes, let's say, but it was looking for something broader. The idea of the picture that I had in mind was something a lot bigger than just the positioning of her eyes, for example. So, and I'm always very conscious that I have to be able to communicate those things in a big way first, and then in a, you know, the smaller moments of the painting have to echo those bigger qualities. But if I miss the bigger sort of milestones in my painting, then I know that the small stuff is not going to save it. I'm very conscious that you know, little details mean nothing when bigger relationships are off. That's been that from the beginning, since I started painting, has been painfully obvious to me. So even though bigger relationships are not usually that attractive, really try to concentrate on those, because those will be fantastic like stepping stones for the further development of detail. So big to small is always a good lesson. The very best of painters have always done that. Yes, you can do it the other way around. You can start from your pinky and make an amazing body, you know, starting from the smallest of relationships. There are people in this world that can do that. That showcases an immense amount of ability. But I think regardless of what sort of painting you like, the artist has always had this very uncanny ability. The great artist has always had, at least in my mind, or had always had this uncanny ability to almost like take a step back and see the big picture, and it's almost like everyone else is caught up in the minutia of what's going on, but the artist is always able to step back and understand that all these parts are very important, but they are working for a bigger sense of reality. So that's a very hard thing to do in painting, because as you know, and I guess that's as human beings, but as a species, we're taught to concentrate on detail, to be very attracted to the smallest things. So try to fight that. And the way we have to fight that, and it's a very unnatural thing to do, is to always go back to a feeling of a whole. So again, just to summarize, what we were attempting to do here was to exercise control in our paintings. It's and this is a very sort of technical way to do it. You know, it's we inscribe ourselves into a definite area of a palette, and we've decided to do so, and we've decided to make an image that's coherent with that area of the palette. So all these steps we've taken before we paint are equally as important. And our palette, our decision to put ourselves in a very small area of a palette, in a very small bit of the grayscale, is going to actually help us. It's going to help us to understand one of the aspects that's going to be very, very important in the developing of much more complicated paintings, which is control. And control doesn't have to be a restraint, but it can be a tool. It can be a very, very powerful tool for us. So this is how my painting is done here, but I'm going to show close-ups of the painting right now. So this is the final image. Like I said, I have my issues with it, but the purpose of the exercise is very evident, and I think the painting exhibits that. And I'm happy that my brushstrokes are very deliberate. They're very committed. I try to always model form in a very, very deliberate way. I want my brushstrokes to remind me of how I painted something, of what I thought about something, and I think that shows. So there are certainly qualities that I like about the final painting. Again, as an exercise, I would ask the people that are interested, and hopefully you can see the potential, and that's the most important part, that this painting is a very, very small example of what can be done with value. And we are still going to explore other areas of our grayscale in future exercises. So don't worry about that. This is going to be far more explicit, far more comprehensive. And eventually we're going to work with our broad value range, and we're going to literally use all the strengths that value, that using a complete grayscale can provide us as painters. So, but we have to start somewhere, and I think that this is a very, very cool place to start, with images that are in many ways hard to look at, but very easy to paint, because there's no, the room for error is very small. And if we mess up, which may happen, we can easily identify why we messed up, because, there's not a lot here. There's just drawing and 4 values, 4 very, very close values. So that's about it. And then it's just construction with paint. So again, just as landmarks for this exercise, pick something that you think makes sense to be painted within these values. And when you've picked that, don't just stick with that image and just try to translate it, but try to interpret it in different ways also. Because the exercise that we usually do when working from life is just that we translate the information that we see from nature into values in our palette, and then we put it in our painting. But the important thing here is interpreting. Try to give yourself, or try to push yourself to find possibilities within that image. Illustrators are the best examples of people that are just trained to do these sort of things. They can't be content with what they're looking. They have to find possibilities working from nature. So 3 is fine. If you can find more, that's amazing. But the idea is to push and push and push further. What are we achieving by pushing? We are realizing that there are no boundaries in an exercise that is almost constructed upon boundaries. So we open our minds and we understand that the only person that would be guilty of exhibiting restraint would be ourselves. The only person that is to blame for making a boring painting out of this exercise would be us. So let's let's tackle this exercise as an opportunity to push ourselves within a very specific set of rules. So that's it. There's more exercises are going to be coming this way. So if you've enjoyed this, hopefully we can make future exercises far more complete. I don't want to make 3-hour videos that people are going to fall asleep watching. They're going to be very concise, but the idea is that we can start from something very simple, and today I think we started from something very simple, and that we can build from this, which is value, to color, to a very sort of deep understanding of color. So if you've enjoyed this, like and subscribe and follow this channel, and also follow me on Instagram. I'm going to do live paintings there. So I think that's going to be a very good complement to this channel. Eventually, I may use YouTube Live or Twitch to do live paintings, and then upload those to this YouTube channel. But for now, these are going to be kind of compressed exercises, and that's it. So thank you all, and hopefully I can count with all of you as very active participants in this. Just let me know how it goes. Show me your results. You can DM me in my Instagram page and show me how you did, when attempting to do this very kind of simple but very solid exercise. So thank you. I'll see you later on the next video. Bye.